Again, aloha and welcome to our George Chaplin Fellowship in Distinguished Journalism address. We're talking about a really important topic tonight, and that's public trust in the media. It's not just an important issue in the United States, but around the world. And as we all know, it's very difficult to sustain a vibrant democracy if you don't have public trust in media. So thank you for coming on to this very important program. So this lecture marks the kickoff of our 50th anniversary of East-West Center media programs. In 1967, our first group of Jefferson Fellows entered the doors of the East-West Center, and it remains today our flagship media program and our longest consistently running program at the East-West Center. We're really proud of it. I was a Jefferson Fellow in 1985, and it still remains one of the most remarkable professional experiences that I had in my career. So today we run about 10 media programs a year. 3,100 journalists have participated in our programs from the United States, from the Pacific Islands, and from Asia. And they represent the top news organizations throughout our country and throughout the region. We're very proud of all our distinguished alumni. We are also very pleased to have our 2017 Jefferson Fellows with us tonight. A very impressive group of 15 journalists from 11 nations. Could our Jefferson Fellows please stand up? And so we can see who they are. Thank you. Thank you. When the Jefferson Fellows come to the East-West Center, we always like to share them with our community because they're such an interesting group of journalists. So we have asked 3 of them tonight to come up and speak very briefly on public trust in media in their state and in their countries. This is an issue that's cutting across the region, as I said, around the world, maybe playing out differently in different countries, but we are really interested to hear their remarks. So they're going to be brief. We're not going to have questions afterward, but please, again, we encourage you to approach them during the reception and talk further. So we'll start with Dr. Viviana Furtado. She is an anchor at WTOL, WUPW in Toledo, Ohio. Viviana, please.
Good evening, buenas noches. Thank you for the introduction. I just wanted to let you know a little bit about Toledo, Ohio, where I moved 18 months ago, right before our presidential election. It is located in Northwest Ohio, southeastern Michigan, 1 hour south of Detroit, and it is located in the red state of Ohio. As goes Ohio, goes the nation. And this last election was no different. Ohio voted decisively for Donald Trump. As I mentioned, it's an area that is blue collar, and it is filled with factory workers and also with, and it is auto country, being just 1 hour south of Detroit. I don't know what's ravaged the neighborhoods and the families of my area more. The factories that have been shuttered. Doler Jarvis no longer operates in Toledo, Ohio, nor does Champion Spark Plugs. I don't know what ravages my neighborhoods and my families more. The factories that closed and left people with very little economic prospects, maybe gigging, meaning getting low-paying service, retail type jobs, and working so much, sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs and still not being able to make what's called a living wage, or the heroin and the opioid crisis, with Ohio being one of the ground zeros. I wanted to talk very briefly about fake news. We just returned from a briefing at the U.S. Pacific Command where fake news was thrown out. And it's become very commonplace. What do you expect? The President of the United States of America refers to the media, refers to the press as fake news. And while there is fake news, and we saw the role of that in this election, And we've seen the change and the pressures of the economic model for journalism that rewards clicks over content, and indeed where content trumps journalism, all puns intended. I do want to say that fake news does exist, but we need to look at a context. And one of the things that I've noticed with my viewers, and also with today's examples at the US Pacific Command, is that the term fake news is used not to designate falsehoods, lies, or inaccuracies, which exist, but rather fake news is used when somebody disagrees with you or when somebody challenges your worldview. Then it must be fake news. I want to say in closing that I am a member of the free press. I am not a member of the media, because the media includes Kim Kardashian. And I say that in all seriousness. I am a member of the free press. And I recognize the privilege, particularly the last couple of days, of being with my distinguished fellows, that I work in the United States where I'm safe to report. I don't live in Mexico where journalists are killed for trying to tell the truth, particularly as it deals with government corruption and the drug trade. And so I would ask all of you that to regain public trust, we need to stand up for the free press. We need to stand up for freedom of speech and for diversity, especially of opinion. And lastly, civil discourse, where we can agree to disagree and where we can seek as many sides of the truth as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Viviana. The next Jefferson Fellow I'd like to call up is Mr. Deb Roy Chowdhury. He's the deputy editor at the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong. He's going to speak about media and public trust in India. Please, Deb.
Hi, good evening. It's an honor to be here. I am Deb, which is much easier than Debashish Chowdhury. And I work for Hong Kong South China Morning Post, where I edit a weekly Asia-focused current affairs magazine. Now, as you can see, I'm Greek. I'm just kidding. I'm Indian, and I started out in India. Oh, sorry. See, I'm not used to public speaking. I started out in India. I worked there for 10 years before I moved out, and I worked in Thailand, and I worked in Beijing for a couple of years. So I have worked in two different media scenarios. One is Indian, is very, it's raucous, unruly, and in China where it's controlled, and there is a lot of censorship and very centralized. So these are very different media scenarios, but the rub is that, and it pains me to say this, that they are not as different as you would like them to believe. And I'm a very proud Indian journalist. Indian journalism has a long tradition of critiquing the government, but even then, I would have to say that in recent years, it has shown signs which are alien to the Indian journalism that I knew it to be. Least I come across as ranting, let me give you some figures. As we know as journalists, numbers tell a story much better than anything else. So I'll give you some figures. India fell 3 spots in 2016 World Press Freedom Index to a lowly 133 out of 180 countries, which is in the region of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and UAE. And this is according to the Reporters Without Borders, which created this 2016 World Press Freedom Index. Now, Freedom House has put India on its watch list of regions where censorship is on the rise, along with China, which ranks 176 in the Reporters Without Freedom Index, the Reporters Without Borders Index of World Press Freedom. And in past 16 months, there have been 54 attacks on journalists, and there have been 3 cases of television channels being banned, 45 internet shutdowns, and 45 sedition cases against journalists. Now, I don't, of course, like any other institution, hollowing out does not happen overnight, so I don't want to go into the details of what has been happening over the years, but in the last few years, some of the recent issues with Indian media is, one is the radically lower tolerance of the government for a viewpoint that is not in conformity of its own, with its own. Then there has been a rising trend of individual targeting of journalists, denial of access to journalists who do not toe the government's line, threat of sedition. This is a colonial era law which has somehow survived 65 years of freedom, and it's a very vague definition, sedition. So anything which the government thinks puts it in a bad frame or contempt, government can apply the sedition charges, which come with, or the maximum sentence is lifelong. So then there are online smear campaigns, then physical threats, which a lot of journalists in India have to bear with on a daily basis. Then last but not the least is the government and corporate advertisements with strings attached. Now, media freedom is a function of essentially 2 things. One is convention, and the other is institutions. The thing is that when you're dealing with unconventional leaders like Erdogan, Duterte, or Modi, or Trump, it's not very helpful to rely on convention. So you have to fall back on institutions. And so when we are talking about institutions, we mean in institutional settings internally within media organizations and externally as in the environment in which they operate. Now, institutionally within the paper, what we have to look for is whether the marketing department is completely segregated from the editorial, and which from anecdotal accounts I know in India is not. So a company which is giving a lot of ads to a certain newspaper can ask the marketing department to make sure that they get a friendly coverage. And since, thanks to liberalization, the government is in bed with the industry, often the companies that are putting out these ads, which have millions of dollars of ad budgets, can make it a condition that you be friendlier to a certain political party, or you cannot say this or you cannot say that. So that's the separation of editorial from the marketing department. And the institutional structures are also, what is important is that the institutional structures that protect the newsroom from the management's dictates within the paper. And these are internal institutions. External institutional structures are the laws in place to protect the journalists. 2 more minutes. Or the laws in place to protect journalists, or the norms for government advertisements. Now, you will be shocked to know that in India, there is no formula for government advertisement. So if the idea of a government advertisement is to reach as many people as you can, then obviously you would want to advertise with the biggest circulated paper or the most consumed television channel. But it is all discretionary in India. So any government, central or state, can decide on its own how much money it will give to a certain newspaper in government ads, and government ads are very important. In the biggest newspapers, they constitute 40% of a newspaper's ad revenue. It is that important. So now I am aware of the rebuilding trust or the trust issues that American newspapers have today, and I'm very interested in the talk today. But trust me, as a non-American journalist, let me tell you something. The US media, the US mainstream media, to me, has never looked more trustworthy than it does now. That is what Trump has done for you. American media has redeemed itself after Iraq with Trump. And a lot of my friends in India look at NYT, look at Washington Post, look at CNN, and look at these newspapers and media with envy, wishing that they could have been able to roast their leader on a daily basis with no fear of retribution. And you have no idea how lucky you are that you're in this place, which is why I will be hearing very carefully to the speech today so that I can learn more about the institutions which enable the American media to do this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deb. Now I'd like to call up Ms. Aiello, Philippine correspondent for Channel News Asia, based in Manila, Philippines.
Good evening, everyone. So I'm based in the Philippines. I cover everything that comes from the Philippines, but more recently it has been very much about politics and our president, Rodrigo Duterte. So in March, Rodrigo Duterte launched a tirade against the local media. He described the Philippine media as being biased, not telling the whole truth. He blamed their alleged corruption for the reason why many of the problems in the Philippines have not been solved. And this isn't the first time. And so rants like this have done a lot to damage the public trust between Philippine media, public trust between public and Philippine media. Philippine media is one of the freest in Asia. They're very noisy and inquisitive, and they have in the past enjoyed high public trust. But under this administration, we are seeing a big shift. During President Duterte's campaign, he didn't have that much money, so instead of spending a lot of money on offline campaigning, he focused on harnessing the power of social media. He used his money to hire a number of bloggers, amass an army of social media experts, and suddenly the Philippines saw a proliferation of fake social accounts and bloggers who generated hundreds of thousands of followers. And these accounts and bloggers were generating very biased, one-sided news in praise of President Duterte. Not only that, they also launched campaigns against the opposition, publishing fake news, attacking media practitioners, even threatening them to try to stem down any criticism against the government. So this has, as Duterte continues to enjoy high support, it has also helped in eroding public trust in the media as they start to look towards these new versions of media. But it's not all doom and gloom. The media has not backed down. They do continue reporting on this, and it has increased awareness. Duterte, despite his dislike for some media outlets, he does continue to engage, and he does answer. And when he does lash out, the media unions, journalism unions have been very vocal in lashing back, in expressing their discontent in it. And there has been more diligence in monitoring fake news and in trying to shut down threats made by, or online threats. So there is a glimmer of hope. Thank you. And I'll leave it to the keynote speaker, who I'm very looking forward to listening to.